G'day everybody and welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you to our ongoing series of podcasts around this thing called leadership, and welcoming you all on a beautiful Saturday morning here in Brisbane. And I am aware that there are fires happening all up and down the east coast of Australia. So for those that are dealing with that, I hope you're all well and you're listening to your local emergency fire and rescue teams to do what it is that you need to do to keep safe, because you can always replace a house and contents, but you can't replace yourself if something happens to you. So please stay safe. And for those of us that aren't in the middle of this firestorm, our thoughts are with you and hope you're all okay. So back to the program. Today's guest reached out to the program, which I'm exceptionally grateful for, to have a chat with us about leadership. So my guest today, her position at this stage is with Infrastructure Sustainability Council Australia, and she is the head of engagement. Can I welcome to the podcast Charlotte Connell? How are you, Charlotte?
Hi, Eric. I'm really well, thank you.
Mate,
thanks for that intro.
Oh, mate, brilliant. That's great, and thank you for reaching out and wanting to be part of this this crazy podcasting thing. So let me start where I started with every podcast to date and ask you, in which industry was your first leader role, and why did you take that on?
I was actually thinking about this a bit, Eric, and it might sound a little bit silly, but I was thinking about the first leadership position role that I've had, and I was thinking it was probably when I was an elected prefect in primary school. I know that sounds really silly, but it's actually, I remember that feeling, as a 12-year-old thinking, I actually have to step up and show my fellow peers what a role model student should be like. I remember thinking that's, I don't know if anyone else has answered like that, and then maybe more in a professional context. I'd say in the seafood industry was my first leadership role where I felt like I actually had quite a good influence over.
So for those listening, I'm ecstatic that your first leadership role in an organisation was in my industry, which is fantastic. For those listening, I work in the seafood industry in Queensland. So yeah, sorry mate, keep going.
No, that's all right. You're the CEO of Queensland Seafood, if I understand that right.
Okay, there's nothing in the title for me. No, go on mate, you're right.
No, and it was an interesting role because I worked for a global eco label called Marine Stewardship Council. So we were an NGO, and we were a global organisation that's been running for over 20 years now, but quite new in Australia. And it was really interesting to think of ourselves as part of the seafood industry, because at the time it wasn't at all. When I was there, we were too green for the seafood industry, and obviously for our fellow NGOs, we were too industry focused. So we never really kept anyone happy, and you're probably treading a good middle ground there if you don't keep anyone happy, right? Possibly.
Yeah.
I'd have meetings with seafood industry experts and industry professionals, and they weren't happy with our standard. And Marine Stewardship Council has a standard for sustainable fishing, and put the eco label on seafood that meets that standard. So our standard was too high for the industry and too low for our fellow green groups. But that's what what the success of the industry of a standard is it has to make an industry raise up to the bar, but obviously not be too unattainable at the same time. And it's all about hoping to change the industry for a more sustainable future for people and planet.
So that interesting first example, and no, you're not the first one to say that. When a guest has said, well, what was my first leadership experience? Some have said primary school, some have said high school, and that, I guess that can always be a precursor to what you might do in the future. It's not always linked that way, but yeah, that's an interesting insight, because you don't really think about your schooling time as a leadership position. And one of the things I've been trying to do with the podcast is say, you can have leadership roles in varying industries. It doesn't have to be for profit. You can come from the not for profit sector. You could be in the volunteering space, and there are always those roles. Whether you're paid for that position or not is not relevant, at least in this context. So look, Charlotte, can I ask a question? The next one is about your experience in terms of the difference, if you see any, between the leadership function and management function?
Oh, yeah, of course. And I think there's a huge difference, actually. I think you can be a really effective manager, but it doesn't necessarily make you a good leader. And I think you can be an exceptional leader, but it doesn't mean you're managing any one particular person. And I think and I'm sure I'll get this wrong, Eric, but there is a great saying that it's, people follow leaders and people work for managers.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
For me, I think a leader, and I think of, a really great leader of our time right now is Greta Thunberg, or Thunberg. It would be the Swedish pronunciation. She's a 16-year-old girl. I'm pretty sure she's not managing a team of people, but she is a leader. She's inspiring and motivating people to action. So in my mind, that's a leader, whereas a manager could be quite linear and, make sure staff meet KPIs and make sure you hit targets. But it's not exactly inspiring, and it doesn't really motivate you to go above and beyond. So,
okay. Let me unpack that a bit, because it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's the word inspire. So do you think that's a essential prerequisite of a leader, that they have an ability to inspire the people that they work with, or at least motivate the people they work with?
Absolutely. I think that's the sort of definitive distinction between a leader and a manager, or is somebody that can inspire action, can inspire. And maybe this is how you get or measure the success of a good leader, is someone who inspires the best from you, not the worst, because there are obviously leaders around the world that can inspire negative actions and can inspire the worst, bring out the worst of people. But if you're that leader that can bring out the best and inspire those to do better the next day and do better than they did the day before, that's a really good leadership quality.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So let me segue into, again, not to be overly negative here, but this one's about making mistakes. So how do you engage with an error or mistake that's attributed to your leadership?
I think everyone says this, that you learn most from your mistakes, and it's absolutely true. I think, and it's a funny thing, as you get older, you obviously mature, but it was a real eye-opener for me to understand, and through some training courses I've done, is that your EQ doesn't actually progress as you get older either. It's something you have to constantly work on. You need to, and sorry, Jill will get upset. I shouldn't say EQ.
Before that, it's okay. Before we go on, EQ being the acronym for emotional. Is that
intelligence?
Emotional
intelligence?
Okay, yeah.
But even though it's Q, I think, because it's like IQ, EQ.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was like, I shouldn't say that, but your emotional intelligence is something you really need to work on all the time, and you do need. It comes with a lot of self-awareness, and self-awareness, as you would know, means you need to be aware of all of your faults as well as your successes. So that's, and thinking about times when, I haven't, it's very easy. I'm thinking back to, I was volunteering in Vanuatu through Australian Youth Ambassador Program. And as a confident young woman, I thought, this is fantastic. I'm going to go into this office in Vanuatu, and I'm going to teach them how to do communications perfectly, and they're going to market their program and do this incredible education outreach. And I had all these wonderful ideas. And of course I got there, and, I had this wonderful background in media and communications and corporate communications. Nobody really spoke English. No one really had internet access. And I was thinking about doing a press release. Who would that go to? No one cared for it. I thought, let's do a tweet. We can tweet, and this will be our campaign. We'll get onto Twitter and social media. Again, no one had Wi-Fi or media access. So it was interesting, because for me, I thought I knew how to communicate, and what I knew was how to push my message out, but I didn't know how to understand a situation very well and listen. And I think that was a really important lesson for me, and it was a big mistake I made when I went in there gung-ho, guns blazing, thinking I knew everything. It was actually a really humbling experience to work out that actually I didn't know anything, and I had to sort of deconstruct everything I knew about communications and marketing, and take it down to the most basic level, and it's understanding your audience and telling good stories.
That's always an ego leveling experience when you have to go back to first principles, because the shifting moving from city to city in a country like this, in a first world country, you're going to have some coverage of internet. You're going to have people that do use the net or do go on Facebook, and so you know that your audience is fragmented to the point that you can reach them on different levels. Whereas when you go to countries where the infrastructure is not quite what it is here, and I think it's a common mistake because you get so used to living in these kind of environments that when you go to countries that don't necessarily have the same infrastructure, suddenly you're put on the spot. And I think it can be a learning experience that makes for better people in the future, is that don't make assumptions, because it will always come back to bite you on the backside. And I'm happy you shared that with me, because I think we've all done it to one degree or another. So when I first started in this role here as a junior person, I got the very big opportunity to go to a conference on climate when I was doing climate work for the association. My old boss provided me some funds to travel. No, not through a grant. Sorry, he got a grant and said, "I want you to go to Japan." So I had 4 months' notice. I barely learnt greetings and stuff to get me through even conversational Japanese, because I was just lazy. When I got there, I felt really like a fish out of water, and I'm in this foreign country. I mean, Japan is a first world country, obviously, but not knowing the language and looking around to see, wow, who can speak English? And I thought, wow, what level of hubris to think that people would be able to just communicate with me in my language when I haven't even been bothered to learn basic hello and goodbye and thank you in Japanese. So I think we've all done it, because you make assumptions, and I think it's part of making you not just a better leader, mate, but I think a better human being, because you won't do it again. Once it's hit you in the face, you hope it won't happen again.
Well, and also not everyone values the same things that you do.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
And what I find fascinating and interesting isn't what the next person does, and that's blew my mind too. So, yeah, it's a very valuable lesson to learn about one, communication, and also people are different from yourself.
No, thank you for sharing that. That was great. Look, and you touched on this in part of your answer, but I will ask this more formally. So what do you think for you is the most difficult part of being a leader, Charlotte?
I think, I know, and I was thinking about, I guess it comes back to that constant self-improvement and improvement, being aware and acknowledge your mistakes and learning from them, and not taking things too personally too. And I think what makes a really good leader isn't, the awards you get, the titles in front of your name or behind your name. It's actually the people you inspire to follow you. I think a good leader, you talk to them and find out what they say about you, what your colleagues say about you, what people who from your sporting team that you coach say about you. I think that's what makes a good leader. So I think the most difficult part about that is, to keep people on this collaborative journey that you create to go to do better. And I think what makes a good leader is someone who isn't about themselves, but is about a purpose. So maybe the most difficult thing about that is to hold steady to that purpose and not get distracted by the forest for the trees, or, you can't see the forest for the trees. So that's probably a difficult thing about being a good leader, is to try not to get distracted or sweat the small stuff, and stay true to your purpose, and others will follow and inspire. They may not at first, but they will. And I think we are seriously lacking of leaders that are unafraid to make unpopular decisions, because true leadership is about making a good decision about the future for everyone. It may not be the popular one right now, and it may not be the one the polls say will swing the voters, but it's going to be beneficial for everyone in the long term. And I think that's a really difficult thing that a lot of leaders fail to step up to. They want to just please everyone, and you're not going to please everyone being a leader. But if you stay true to your purpose, everyone will benefit in the long run.
It's a great thing to share with the listeners. Now, you've, as a good podcast guest, you've answered part of my next question.
Whoops. Sorry.
No, that's okay. It's the nature of these questions. So how do you measure success as a leader? And I think we can unpack this one a bit more, because you did mention how others view you, but do you think there's other indicators, and I don't necessarily mean success in how much money you make or whether you've hit an objective, because that's part of leadership and management. I mean, you've got to reach some goals at some point, but are there other factors that you consider that are measures of success, at least for you?
At our Infrastructure Sustainability Council of Australia, or ISCA for short, at our conference recently, we had a international speaker who was a 20-year-old CEO of her own business called Girl Boss from New Zealand, and she's an incredible speaker. Her name is Alexia Hilberto, and I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly. Alexia Hilberto. That's how you pronounce the name. It is quite difficult, but she's very inspiring. And she said something that really stuck with me, and it was leadership used to be about power. Today, leadership is about influence. And I thought that's actually, she's really hit the nail on the head there, because I touched on that before. Leadership was about those sort of titles in front of your name and how many people you have as your minions, or how much money you make and the positions you hold. But actually, you can be quite an inspiring leader because of the influence and the reach you have. And I guess this is a 20-year-old talking to a conference of 400 professionals, and she was inspiring, and she's inspired me into action and motivated me. And again, the example of Greta, she's not managing anyone. She hasn't got the title of CEO, but she's a leader, and she's a successful leader because she's inspiring actions. So I think that could be your reach and influence is definitely can be a measure of the success of a leader. And really, I think I went back to before, is if you can inspire the best out of people, if you inspire the worst actions out of people and you have a huge negative influence, that's not necessarily a great leader. But if you can inspire the best out of people and to do better, to better themselves each day, then I think that's a really good measure of successful leader.
Again, thank you for that. So look, there's and just to move on with more of a focus on person specifics in a leadership role, I've got a couple of what you might call statements that I might get your views on. So the first one, Charlotte, is on-the-job experience develops better leaders.
Look, I think absolutely. I think particularly because you need to apply the skills you learn practically always. And I think mentoring, a mentoring relationship on the job really does inspire better leaders. So I do think on the job experience, you can learn, theorize as much as you like about leadership qualities and skills, but it's until you absolutely apply it and you learn by doing is how you get better leaders.
Brilliant. So the extension to that is, do you believe formal education helps to develop better leaders?
Now, I do. When you're talking about this, Eric, are you talking about a formal education in terms of like a university degree or a diploma or a master's?
Yeah. So I don't. So by formal education, that the depth and breadth of that could be certificates, study at TAFE, study at uni, study at professional courses, the whole gambit of what formal education looks like. So you've got to go somewhere to get some kind of instruction, and you've got a bit of paper as you did this course or that course. That's what I kind of mean, yeah. So
you and I are both alumni of the National Seafood Industry Leadership Program, and yeah. I absolutely think that is a fantastic program, and that definitely brought out leadership skills and leadership training I wasn't even aware of, and that have helped me so much, not only in my professional life, but in my personal life as well. So absolutely, I do think not only do you need formal education for leadership skills, but you do need to actually practically apply that with on-the-job training as well. So there's definitely a combination of those two.
So what year were you a graduate of the program, Charlotte?
When did I graduate? It was it 2014?
Okay, so I was from the 2011 crop, the probably the most dynamic of the graduate.
Was yours the most dynamic? Was it?
Yeah, I'm making that statement. I'll make that statement right now. So for those that are from the 2011 group, welcome to the podcast. So Charlotte, the last statement I've got here, and I'm curious to get your perspective on this, is leaders are born, not made.
I have been thinking about this. I think leaders are born. I actually do. I do think, I look at my son who's 3 and he is very influential in his daycare. He just sets the tone for behavior and the kids run with it. So I think you can be born with a natural propensity to be a leader. I don't think that makes you a good leader. I think that's a distinction.
Yep.
So I think you absolutely need to have those skills. You need to be trained. You need on-the-job experience. And you need to constantly reflect upon, make those mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and have some good mentors to help you through and help guide you. Because I can see it with my son. He is just born very confident. He has this swagger when he walks into a room, and it's like he has leadership. But it doesn't make a good leader just being confident and being able to command attention. You actually also need to be quite humble and learn to understand. And I have to teach him some skills, and hopefully it's a good combination of that formal training and on-the-job training. So I do think leaders are born, but I think they need to be made through good education and good training.
Yeah, okay. So almost like a continuum. Yeah, that makes sense to me. So look, this is a bit in the podcast where I ask the guests some questions around some core leadership capabilities. Now, these come from my studies that I'm doing at the moment, which is kind of asking the question, what does a fit for future leader look like in the ag space? And what I've come up with, or what's screaming at me out of the literature, is that strategic thinking and foresight seem to be the most critical leadership capabilities for leaders in the future. What's not necessarily chasing a view or not of the statement, more what are your thoughts around strategic thinking and foresight as leader capabilities just in general?
I also, sorry to backtrack though, Eric, I did want to find out, what do you think about leaders being made or born?
Oh, okay. So you're the second podcast guest that's asked me a question. This is brilliant.
Well, I'd love to know your perspective. What do you think?
Sure. Look, in my 44 years on this planet, when I got out into the world of work, every day that I was meeting people, particularly as a junior person. So my first role out of university was because I'd held jobs when I was working through uni. So I worked in construction. I worked with my old man. I did odd jobs here and there. I even ran my own little cleaning business just to get through university. And I met people in those areas of work and industry, and I found that some people gravitated towards them because they just had a quality. I couldn't put my finger on what it was. It's just, hey,
je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, they know their stuff, and it makes me confident that if they're going to do something, I know I'm going to get the outcome I want. But when I left university and I had my formal training, I was towards my late 20s. So I got to that stage where I didn't know every bloody thing, and I took that attitude into my first job, which was in Canberra in the industry department. And when I met my first manager, we'll call her Gabby. It's not her name, but we'll call her Gabby. When I met Gabby, she said to me, who do you believe is the most important person on this floor? And I went immediately to her as my manager, and she goes, no, don't need for brown nosing. Okay, your manager, no. He said, it's the people that work in the admin side of things on this floor that keep the place ticking over. These are the people you need to treat like gold, because they come here and do a very difficult job to make your job a lot easier. And I'd never given that a second thought. And that kind of put me on the path to thinking, when you get into an office space or any workspace, assume you know nothing and build your knowledge of the human beings that you're working with to make their day and your day go a lot better. Once I started doing that, I immediately made friends to this day that I still communicate with, that are still friendly, and that I've taken that, and it's grown over time to the degree that I'm not afraid to have a conversation with somebody, but I like to get to know the person I'm talking to before we get into topics about work, because it gives you some insight into where they're coming from. And so for me, in my travels, I think I've seen both leaders that are just naturally gifted leaders, and some that I've seen developed over time. And I have been fooled. So one leader that I interviewed, his name is Brian Skepper, who's now retired from the Sydney fish markets, who
Yeah.
happen to be the, for those listening, our inaugural supporter of the podcast. So thank you to Sydney Fish Markets for that. I interviewed Brian, and he is a really good communicator. And when he did the podcast with me, he said, no, I had to learn how to be more a better listener and more open to understanding the other person's point of view. And I wouldn't have picked that on him at all. So in his case, the way he described his pathway to being a better leader in his organization, because he's been with the markets for 40 odd years, he said you need to build those skills. And so you might call it fence sitting, or others might call it fence sitting, but I think I've seen both. And I think it's a good thing that we've got both, because you don't want a natural born leader that, like you said, that is twisted and doesn't understand people, yet you want to develop people with leadership skills so that they've got the core suite of things to make things happen, as well as being able to relate to other human beings. And that at the end of the day, when you go home, you are working in jobs, and it's not necessarily the whole you. So, let's make our time at work that much friendlier, because we spend too much time working and not enough time doing other things. So if we're going to be doing that, try and make the time as best as you can, I reckon.
Yeah. And I mean, it's about people, right? So it's, and you can have, you can be that person with gravitas, but you need to sort of hone or develop those skills. Some people are natural listeners and natural people persons, but you need to definitely hone those skills to be a good leader. So that's really good to hear.
Yeah, look, and just as an aside, so that I don't forget this, and at least I've got it recorded for future reference. I think for any of those that are listening that are particularly in the emerging leader space, so you're starting your careers out, ask as many questions as you can of those that have had more experience than you. If it's not formal mentoring or mentoring of some kind, just ask people occasionally what their experiences are, what they did in a certain situation, because you'll always be able to learn something from somebody if you take the time to ask that question. And it kind of sets you up for potentially friendships in the future with colleagues, because again, if you're going to see these people every day, it's good to find out what makes somebody tick, or why somebody would react one way and not another. And I think it makes for better people if you can take a few seconds out of your day to not worry about yourself and ask someone else what they're doing and what they're thinking.
Now when you mentioned that before, and I took you back, Eric, but strategic thinking and foresight, are they the most critical skills for future leaders? And I actually was thinking, I think it's understanding. It's, yes, you need to have foresight, because let's think of that example of, when Netflix offered to sell to Blockbuster for 50 million, and the Blockbuster CEO said, oh, what a joke. And that's how much Netflix makes a day now, 50 million. Obviously you need foresight. Strategic thinking, absolutely. You can't just think of the process. You need to think of the purpose beyond and tomorrow. But I think you need to understand people. You need to understand your team, like you said before, understand what makes them tick, and, take time in your day to ask how other people are, and not always just think of yourself. I think they're the skills that often get overlooked, and they're called soft skills most of the time, but they're not soft. They're the most valuable. I think, leadership and management isn't about things, it's about people. So I actually absolutely think that the most critical skill for future leaders is people skills and understanding others.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I really detest the term soft skills. I think
same.
It's the hardest thing to do, to make yourself open to someone else by saying, hey, I don't understand something, or hey, I need help, or to say, are you okay with something that's happening in the workplace? Or if I take some of the really challenging stuff that was put up with some podcasting I did around mental health, is to walk up to someone you know or you don't know and ask them how they're going and whether or not things are okay, because sometimes that's all somebody needs to stop them from sinking into more negative thoughts about themselves. And I don't mean in a clinical way, hey, diagnose someone, but just being able to make yourself available and say, hey, do you want to have a chat about something? that's not a soft skill. That's hard to do, and not a lot of people can do that well, nor have the fortitude to do it. So whoever came up with that terminology of soft skills, they either don't understand human beings or prefer to write something down in a textbook or not be able to be challenged on it. So I personally have a problem with the term, but let's not worry about what my gripes are, because the podcast is about you, not me. So look, I have one more question for you.
Sure. I was going to say, sorry, and
you go.
I'm on a board of a community organisation called One Wave, and we get together every Friday in crazy bright colours, and we call it Fluoro Friday, and we sit in a circle and we share stories about mental health struggles, and it really creates a community and a sort of a safe space in this anti-bad vibe circle. And then we all go surfing or we do yoga, and it's really allowing that sort of space for, you know what, it's okay to not be okay, and you know, this is real and it happens, and we're trying to smash the stigma around mental health through, you know, you can't fight hate with hate, you need to fight it with love. And so we fight something dark like mental health with bright colors, and we draw attention to it, and we try to do it in a real fun way. So yes, I'm very much aware of that, you know, creating those safe spaces to not be okay. And it's not soft, it's hard to do, but it can be so rewarding. So go on with your last question, Eric.
No, I agree. And that space is a difficult space to talk about, but it's good to see that a group of you are prepared to do that and to be able to have those conversations, because it can be difficult to have. So look, the last question, this is around sort of some hindcasting here. So if I said, what might you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader, Charlotte?
I would say it's not about me, it's we. So stop thinking it's about yourself, Charlotte. It's actually about who you bring along with you. It's about who you can learn from, and it's about everyone else. So I think that's the kind of advice I would have. Looking back, I thought of myself as a natural leader because I was that confident person, the loudest person. And actually it's funny, the quietest person in the room is often the one that everyone listens to. So, you know, I always wanted attention, always wanted to be, and always was very confident. And that's not effective leadership. Being all about you, it's actually being all about everyone else.
Thank you. That is a very nice way to end the podcast. So for those that are listening, this has been Talking Leadership.